I'm back, guys. I had my 2-week vacation. It was glorious, but I'm back now, and I'm ready to do more videos. I was considering what to talk about next, what fits into the timeline of things, and I keep getting the most questions about embalming. So I wanted to do a video on embalming, but then I realized that there's so many other things that happen prior to embalming that I can't even talk about embalming without talking about all of these other things. So let's talk about the very beginning. Death. Death. Death! 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 You can't start doing anything until someone's dead. Well, you can, but it would be totally illegal. So what is death? Death is the total, irreversible cessation of all metabolic activity and all vital functions. And if you're a lawyer, that has to be backed up by a minimum 24-hour flat EEG. Even within the category of death, there's two subcategories of death. There's the legal or clinical death, which can actually be reversed, and then there's the biological or irreversible death, which is irreversible. Once you reach irreversible death, that's when you get organ failure, and you also have something called somatic death, which is the death of the entire organism. And even somatic death is a progression as well. There's a timeline, so to say. There's the agonal period, clinical death, brain death, biological death, and finally, cellular death. Did you ever think death could be so complicated? So before we even consider somatic death, we have to take into consideration the changes that happen antemortem in the agonal period. Now, if you look at the word antemortem, it tells you exactly what it is. The prefix ante means before, and mortem means death. Antemortem changes are sometimes called agonal changes, and all of this takes place right before actual death. The importance of looking at the antemortem changes in the body is that it can actually help us to determine how we're going to embalm the body later on, after they actually die. So there's 5 basic changes that happen in the agonal period. The first is temperature changes. You can have agonal algor, or you can have agonal fever. Agonal algor is the cooling of the body, and agonal fever is raising the temperature of the body. Agonal algor usually happens in someone who has a chronic disease, and they've been hanging on for a pretty long time. Basically, what it means is that the metabolism is slowing down, and then the circulation, especially to the extremities, is being cut off, or all of the circulation is trying to stay within the core of the body to keep the important things in your body alive, your heart, all of your guts, your brain, because when you really look at the big picture, our extremities, we don't need them to survive. So sometimes when people get close to death, all of their circulation kind of goes into the core, their torso and their head. Agonal fever can indicate that there's bacteria present, that there's an infection present. I think we've all had maybe like a little splinter or something that's gotten infected, and if you let it go long enough, it gets red around the opening, and you maybe not were able to feel it, but if there's an infection present, it will actually be hot. There will be more circulation around the opening of that. It can also mean that the circulatory system is being depressed somehow, and the person no longer has the ability to displace heat properly. The important thing to remember with agonal fever is that if there is an infection present, infection means bacteria, and bacteria can cause a lot of problems down the line. The second change that we have is in the circulatory system, and there's 3 of those. There's agonal hypostasis, agonal coagulation, and agonal capillary expansion. I had to actually cheat and look at those. Agonal hypostasis means that blood is settling to the dependent parts of the body. So if the person is bedridden, for example, blood is basically going to make its way down to their back, the back of their head. Since they're not moving a lot, their circulatory system isn't moving that blood, so it's basically going to pool at areas where gravity is pulling it. Agonal coagulation is when you have your white blood cells settling out from the rest of everything else that's in your blood. So if you think of like an oil-based salad dressing, if you let it sit long enough, how it separates on its own, well, if you're sitting long enough and you're not getting up and moving and having your blood move through your circulatory system, your blood will also start to settle out. And what that means is that it can form clots. And this is a pretty good sign of a depleted immune system at the time of death. Agonal capillary expansion is exactly what it sounds like. It's your capillaries expanding, in an attempt to get more oxygen. Because of this capillary expansion, it also moves moisture into other parts of the body, which leads to the next stage, number 3, moisture changes. Within these two, we have agonal edema and agonal dehydration. So when you have agonal coagulation, and it separates your blood into serum and white blood cells and all that other kind of stuff, that serum is what is moved out when agonal capillary expansion happens. I don't know why I can't remember that one. I keep having to look at my notes for it. So the serum actually moves out of the capillaries when you get that expansion. Agonal edema is caused by the blood serum moving out into other parts of the body. It can cause excess moisture in different parts of the body. Basically, that blood serum becomes extravascular. Extra meaning outside, and vascular meaning of the arteries and veins. So you might just have a part of the body, maybe a forearm or something, that when you touch it, it's just moist for seemingly no reason. Agonal dehydration it's pretty obvious. That's just dehydration of the tissues. And this usually occurs if someone has had a really prolonged death. There's a few examples listed here of things that may cause agonal dehydration: slow hemorrhage, febrile diseases, that's infection or toxemia, kidney diseases, diabetes, cancers, and first-degree burns. Number 4 is agonal translocation of bacteria. I never really knew what little bastards bacteria could be until I started studying this stuff. So imagine that you've eaten a really great steak dinner, or if you're a vegetarian, a really great tofu dinner, and you let it, you're just like digesting and still thinking about that meal, it's all great, and then all of a sudden, heart attack! Well, all of those happy little bacteria that were helping break down your nice meal in the lower right quadrant of your body, because of the capillary expansion, now they're all over your body. So now, instead of breaking down that nice meal like they were supposed to, they're going to break the rest of you down from the inside out. These little guys, by the way, their name is Clostridium perfringens, and they are an anaerobic bacteria. Usually when there's something really wrong with the body, it can be traced back to the good old CP. Those guys are total assholes when you're dead. So these little guys, the Clostridium perfringens, as they're eating you, they're basically giving off a gas, which then stays in your body, and that leads us to our 5th stage, which is gases in the tissues. There's 2 kinds of gas. You can either get subcutaneous emphysema or tissue gas, which is a bitch. Tissue gas is more likely to be seen in a post-mortem case, but it can happen ante-mortem as well. So I'll probably talk more about that later. But just for now, remember, oh man, if you have tissue gas, you've got problems. So those are the important ante-mortem changes in the body to look for. If you know about these before you embalm a body, it makes it so much easier to be able to know how you're going to embalm that body and to make your plan beforehand, because it's going to be a lot worse if you have to do your cutting and then start to figure things out once you start embalming, and then you're like, why isn't this body taking the fluid like it should? Well, it could be because maybe they have a clot, or there's another kind of blockage. There's a whole bunch of things. So it is really helpful to know about ante-mortem changes in the body. Like always, if you guys have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section, or you can send me a message. I hope that I covered everything that I wanted to cover. I only have so much time to do it in with these videos, so I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.